Alright, so today we are going to be ranking every single episode of One Piece ever, so make sure you stay tuned. No, but seriously, what's up, y'all? Zappy MMA here, back for another banger. And with the sport that is MMA, to say that there's very little room for error, especially at the highest level, is an understatement. When you have two high level athletes swinging at each other with 5-ounce gloves, just the slightest of mistakes can have a very devastating impact. You accidentally zigged when you should have zagged, and suddenly the whole trajectory of your career changes in a blink of an eye. This small cause, but very significant effect process is referred to as the butterfly effect, which I believe comes from how something as little as a butterfly flapping its wings could potentially trigger a tornado elsewhere, or something like that. One of the most famous cases of the butterfly effect is Archduke Franz Ferdinand accidentally making a wrong turn on a street, allowing his assassin to assassinate him, which triggered a chain reaction and basically ended up causing World War One. If Archduke Franz quite literally zigged instead of zagged, I mean, who knows how different the world would be right now if World War One never actually ended up happening. So for today's video, we are going to be going over 5 of the most craziest butterfly effects in UFC history, with some happening inside and some happening outside the octagon. And just getting right into it, with one of the more well-known butterfly effects is of course the Tony Ferguson cable incident. Now, the notorious Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov fight never ended up actually happening and is now considered to be a cursed match, having been canceled 5 times between 2015 and 2020. Most of these cancellations were due to things like injuries from either sides, bad weight cuts, etc. But one of these cancellations in particular really stands out amongst the rest. So back in April of 2018, after being canceled 3 times by then, Tony Ferguson versus Khabib was set for UFC 223 main event for the vacant lightweight title, and things were going smoothly. It was really starting to look like we were finally going to get the highly anticipated matchup. But unfortunately, on April 1st, ironically, and just a week away from Tony and Khabib's matchup, a freak accident occurred on a UFC media day backstage at a Fox studio lot. So legend goes, one of the UFC or Fox production crew members accidentally left a loose cable backstage, to which Tony Ferguson actually ended up tripping over it, which then caused him to seriously injure his LCO in a freak accident. Now with an injured Tony Ferguson, his fight with Khabib was canceled for now a 4th time in a row, just 6 days before the match. And the butterfly effect this cable caused doesn't just end with Tony never fighting Khabib. You see, Tony not only had to fight once, but twice before getting another title shot. And in those 2 fights against Anthony Pettis and Cowboy Cerrone, a lot of people say he was never really the same after the knee surgery due to him tripping over the loose cable. With the war against Anthony Pettis and a compromised knee, Tony finally found himself in another matchup against Khabib, this time in 2020 for UFC 249, only for the fight to yet again be canceled for the 5th and final time due to something about COVID restrictions, I believe. Now, with the short notice Justin Gaethje stepping in to replace Khabib, an already compromised Tony Ferguson had to make 2 brutal weight cuts in the span of about 2 weeks, and Tony Ferguson did end up losing in brutal fashion by TKO in round 5, as we all know, accumulating a large amount of damage for nearly 25 minutes. Then, we all know what happened next. Tony Ferguson ended up going on a huge downward spiral, from once being on a 12-fight win streak to ending his UFC career on an 8-fight losing streak. It's just crazy how something as little as a loose cable potentially led to all these other things happening to Tony Ferguson. But there is sort of a happy ending to all this, because since being cut from the UFC, Tony Ferguson has now found success in boxing, to which he is currently 2-0. And people forget, man, Terrence Crawford ducked Tony Ferguson. All right, moving on. Back in 2016, at a UFC 205 press conference, one of the more legendary press conferences of all time, we got a lot of classic McGregor one-liners, including the now infamous,
"Who the fuck is that guy? Who the fuck is that?"
Now, what some of you guys may not know is what sparked this legendary line was a simple question asked by some reporter at the press conference.
Who do you think would give you the hardest fight out of anybody on stage?
And after McGregor mocked Jeremy Stevens, he actually did answer the initial question on who would give him the hardest fight on stage, to which he replied with,
I don't know what anyone else has for me around here. I might have to jump up and fucking drag Floyd Mayweather out of bed and see what the fuck he's at again.
This was actually the first mention of McGregor fighting Mayweather in a boxing fight, which then started being talked about after this press conference. And that quick response on him wanting to box Mayweather did eventually lead up to it really happening after the Eddie Alvarez fight. It's just funny to think that such a simple question from a reporter potentially caused a chain reaction leading to McGregor's boxing crossover, which a lot of people credit to his downfall due to his big payday. And even though it may be a bit of a stretch, it's not crazy to say that that question itself is a reason why the Mayweather fight ended up actually happening in the first place. Who would know what would have happened to McGregor's career if he stayed hungry for MMA and never took off all that time to go box Mayweather? Things could have been a lot different, to say the very least. All right, next up, we have another more well known case of the butterfly effect in the UFC. And of course, I am talking about the 2018 Israel Adesanya Alex Pereira interview. So back in 2018, during the rise of Israel Adesanya, he was doing an interview when the interviewer asked him about the then mostly unknown Alex Pereira and his two kickboxing losses he had at the time to him, including one being by knockout. Now, this caused Israel Adesanya to go off on Alex Pereira, saying things like what he has become and how Pereira at the time was still unknown and how he got robbed in the first kickboxing fight, etc. But then Israel Adesanya said something very interesting, which he couldn't have possibly known at the time the crazy effect that that simple response was going to cause.
He's gonna be at some pub talking some shit about I beat that guy one time.
You see, at the time, Alex Pereira wasn't the guy we know him as today. He was struggling with alcoholism. He wasn't taking his career seriously. He was sort of drinking his life away in a bar, kind of like what Israel Adesanya said. Now, the story goes is Alex Pereira actually saw this interview while he was drinking, and these strong words from Israel Adesanya really made Pereira reevaluate his situation in life at the time, which then ignited a hunger in him to not be that guy in the bar, but to stop drinking and start taking his career seriously. Alex then went on to use those words as motivation, becoming a two-division glory champion, then transitioning to MMA, where then just 3 years after this interview, he was signed to the UFC, and of course we all know the story after that. Since then, Alex Pereira has achieved more than Israel Adesanya has in the UFC, becoming a two-division champ, a two-time champ, one of the best MMA fighters of all time, and now talks of him moving up to heavyweight for a record third title. Who knows how different the UFC would have been today if Israel Adesanya never did that interview and once again ignited that flame in Alex Pereira to become the legend that he is today. And even Israel Adesanya himself has referenced this. All right, moving on. Now, this one didn't have the biggest impact in terms of the UFC as a whole, but rather for a single fighter in particular. And the fighter I'm referring to is Rob Font. So Rob Font, he's not the best bantamweight on the roster, but he's been pretty consistent throughout his UFC career and didn't start training until his early 20s. He was actually a pizza delivery man. According to Rob Font, one day while delivering pizzas, he stopped at some house to deliver to some guys in a garage, and he noticed that they were watching a fight. This fight just so happened to be GSP versus BJ Penn, and at the time, Rob didn't really know what MMA or the UFC was, and it really caught his attention. So the guy he was delivering to briefly explained MMA and the UFC promotion, how it involved multiple martial arts, and this really intrigued Rob Font. After work that day, Rob Font then went home, to which he looked up the UFC. He found out what jiu-jitsu was and Muay Thai, etc., which then led to him basically falling in love with the sport. He then started training and eventually ended up going pro and making it all the way to the UFC. Now, where Rob Font would have been today if he never ended up delivering pizzas to that certain house in particular is up for debate, but it's not a stretch to say that he may have never even started training in the first place. And for the final topic on this list, we all know Kamaru Usman was comfortably up against Leon Edwards in their rematch at UFC 278 until he got KO'd with a head kick in the last minute of round 5. Now, what some of you guys may not know is just how much of an insane butterfly effect that one kick caused for the UFC, and this might be a bit of a stretch, but just hear me out, okay? If Usman just made it 50 seconds longer to the bell, Leon would have never became champion, meaning Bilal more than likely would have never became champion either, meaning JDM wouldn't have got a title shot so soon, meaning that Islam might have not been as motivated to vacate the lightweight belt and move up, meaning that we possibly could have got Ilya versus Islam. Also, if Usman was still champ, Kobe would have never gotten an undeserved title shot against Leon, meaning he probably would have had to fight Shavkat for the real number one contender, meaning Shavkat would have never fought Ian Gary injuring his knee, which basically means Charles Oliveira would have been a 4 division champion. All of this never happened because Leon got that last minute fluke KO against Usman, and that might sound like a bit of a stretch, but just really think about it for a moment. And that's going to do it for today, guys. As always, if you made it this far, you might as well like and subscribe, and until next time.